Next up on the Capitol Cable, Mr. Lee comes to Washington. President Lee Jae Myung's visit, summit, all of that and more with us to unpack it, to discuss. General Brooks, Dr. Cha, Dr. Luck, coming at you next on the 119th edition of the Capitol Cable. All right, good morning to those of you in DC. Good evening to those of you in Korea. Good day to those of you around the world. Welcome to the 119th installment of the CSIS Capitol Cable. I'm Mark Lippert, your host and moderator. This week on the Capitol Cable, Mr. Lee comes to Washington. President Lee Jae Myung's visit to Washington, which included a summit, of course, with President Trump, a visit to a naval shipyard, or a shipyard rather, a business roundtable, and saving perhaps the best for last, a visit to CSIS, where he took the stage at the CSIS Statesman's Forum to deliver his first foreign policy address while serving as president of the Republic of Korea. Let's roll that tape, Andy, of President Lee at CSIS earlier this week.
여러분, 휴가철인데도 이렇게 많은 분들이 함께 해주셔서 진심으로 감사드립니다. 제가 준비된 원고에 따라서 말씀드리기 전에 우리 존경하는 햄리 이사장님 말씀처럼 대한민국은 잠시 위기를 겪었던 게 사실입니다.
All right, that gives you a flavor of the atmosphere, the punigi, as they say, in the room. It was energetic, it was charged, it was active, it was exciting, and it was very informative and insightful as well. I'm bearing the lead here a bit. And moreover, I'm impressed with our technical staff that we actually worked that in seamlessly. So really, really great stuff there. And Victor, what was not seen was you introducing Dr. Hamry, who did introduce President Lee, and went on to have a very interactive Q&A session with them as well, which I approved, quite insightful and lively as well. So Victor, can you, not just the CSIS piece, but can you walk us through what happened in and around the summit? But before we get into that, I'm going to tee up Victor in a second. I just quick introductions of all of our guests here, positioned to position here to give us color and insight here today. You know them well. They've all been on the show multiple times, of course. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on their bios, but of course, leading us off, General Brooks, 42 years in the U.S. Army, including 2 4-star assignments, USFK, USRPAC, served in major roles in Europe, Middle East, Central Asia. Currently sits on the board of 4 publicly traded companies, 2 nonprofits, been associated with the Council on Foreign Relations, the Belfer Center, 2 great think tanks at the University of Texas, although they play my Buckeyes this weekend, so it's a little circumspect there. And of course, has been on advisory boards at the CIA, the Department of Defense, held an endowed chair at West Point, and of course, is a graduate of West Point, has a master's degree and an honorary doctorate from other distinguished institutions. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, also gave us the best gifts for our kids when they were born, Sejun and Sehi, who I mentioned to the President of the Republic of Korea earlier this week. General Brooks, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mark. Good to be with you.
All right, excellent. No comeback on the Texas jab there. You know, are you a Longhorn fan? All right, there. Oh, no.
Horns.
Okay, all right.
There you go.
All right, we're in trouble. We got Brooks on board. It's the steamroller. It's over. All right. Thanks, General Brooks. Really appreciate you being here today. All right. Of course, Dr. Luck, who everyone knows well, is also a Scholl Chair at CSS, Director of the Economic Programs. His time in government included serving as the Deputy Chief Economist at the Department of State. He, of course, served in academic roles, including at the University of Colorado, Denver, tenure track assistant professor there, graduated from UMass Amherst, and PhD masters from UC Davis. Dr. Luck, welcome back to the show.
Great to be here.
All right, outstanding. And last but not least, of course, Victor Cha, who's going to set us up, walk us through the summit events. But Victor, everybody knows Victor as well, president of the Geopolitics Center here at CSIS, director of the Korea Chair, of course, Georgetown University professor, vice dean emeritus, Defense Policy Board, Bush NSC, and of course, New York Giants fan. Victor, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, it's going to be a great year.
I'm putting my money on General Brooks, not on you at this point. I'm on FanDuel right now on the side. Anyway, all right, outstanding. All right, deadly serious topic, really interesting early part of the week this week in Washington. It's precisely why we're having this special Capitol Cable on Wednesday to unpack President Lee's trip to D.C. and, of course, meeting with President Trump and all of the other important events, including CSIS. So, Victor, without further ado, can you walk us through the events that unfolded earlier this week?
Sure, absolutely. You're right, Mark. It was a very busy week, very busy 2 weeks, really. I mean, if we go back to prior to coming to Washington, D.C., President Lee went to Japan, met with the Prime Minister of Japan, and then came directly from there to Washington, D.C. Of course, this was the first and long-awaited meeting between President Lee and President Trump. We had this 6-month interlude where the political crisis in Korea didn't allow for a Korean head of state to meet President Trump as he came in January. When President Lee was elected, they tried to meet in Canada on the sidelines of the G7, but President Trump left a day early. The Koreans thought about going to The Hague for the NATO Leaders Summit, but in the end did not go. This was really the first and long-awaited opportunity. The day started a little bit late. I think they started an hour late than scheduled, but there was a Oval Office press availability that I think anybody who followed Korea saw, a 1 hour or slightly longer than 1 hour press availability before the meeting. Those things usually go at most maybe 12 minutes, but with the Trump administration, those become very long. A lot of interesting things said during that we can talk about. Then they had their meetings and a lunch. President Lee then did a CEO roundtable that went very well, that business leaders from Korea participated in, as well as U.S. business leaders. And then after that, he came to CSIS, as you showed in that clip, to participate in a VIP session, reception, which our fair host and Ambassador Lippert participated in, as well as the foreign policy speech. This was his first foreign policy speech of his administration. So we were very happy to host it at CSIS. And then we had a small dinner for him afterwards that Mark and a few others participated in. All in all, it was a full day. By the end of the day, I have to say, President Lee was still full of energy. The rest of us were dragging, but he still seemed to be full of energy and was ready to continue with the question and answer and discussion. And then, of course, after that, the next day, there was a stop at Arlington Cemetery in the morning, and then a trip to Philly Shipyard, where the Koreans wanted to show or demonstrate their commitment to working with the United States on this big shipbuilding concept, this shipbuilding project. Lots of details to be worked out that we can talk about. But yeah, very busy 2 days, and overall, I think it all went fairly well. Could have gone a lot worse.
Outstanding. All right, thanks, Victor. Thanks for the analysis. I too would agree with you that in the interactions of which I was a part, he was energetic, sharp, on point. I just want to underscore and reiterate that as well. All right, let's go to General Brooks. General Brooks, you're a longtime observer of Korea, longtime, I would say, participant as well in the U.S. ROK alliance in a number of different capacities. How did you see the visit, and what stood out to you? And again, welcome back to the Capitol Cable.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's always great to be on with you, and I love how you do this. You do such a fantastic job as host. It's energy and excitement as always. So it's great to be with you again. And Victor and Dr. Luck, it's good to see you. Always great to be with you as well. I think Victor set it up very nicely. I would say that first, I will call it a win-win-win. Okay, so it was a win for South Korea. It was a win for the United States, and it was a win for the alliance. And I'm particularly focused on the alliance, having been an alliance commander, how important it is to make sure that survives in an era of essentially nationalism that can arise in a number of places and show up in events like a summit that was just held and other summits that have occurred. So I thought that it was good overall in that regard. It wasn't very substantive. So certainly the meeting at the Oval was not. That was very much a setting of the relationship, but that's okay. That was a good start as far as I'm concerned. If one believes that there are really kind of two schools that exist inside of the Lee Jae Myung administration, one would be a sovereigntist school or sovereignty school, and the other one would be an alliance school. And they're a mixture of both types of players in key positions. It was clear that the alliance school was leading this effort, and that President Lee Jae Myung was very well prepared. The lunch discussion, not clear on exactly what was discussed there. It's interesting that there was not a joint communique that came out afterwards. And those declarations obviously can set the tone for years on where an alliance or a relationship is going at a given point in time. We didn't see that. I do think the alliance is still in a strong position here. There were some interesting questions that came up and some interesting offerings about land and other things that were a bit surprising, quite honestly. What did not come up, and I think perhaps a lot of people were looking for, was a heavy discussion about the security aspects of the U.S. Korea relationship. Other than moving from a military-centric alliance to a more comprehensive global alliance that was consistently carried forward from the previous administration, but not getting into the weeds in any way, or even touching the weeds with regard to force strength and all these sorts of things. So that is work that is yet to be done. I do believe that the way the summit came out, it leaves room now for staff level discussions and dialogue, except where the two national leaders, and we must add other national leaders in the region, choose to intervene and cause a particular thing to become more focused, more acute at a given point in time, like discussions with North Korea, like the South Korea-China relationship, like the Japan-Russia relationship. All these things will have impact as the national leaders choose to maneuver. But overall, a good start. And I think that the Lee Jae Myung administration is heading in the right direction and moving well with the United States.
All right, outstanding, General Brooks. If I may, just a follow-up question for you. You obviously can have the mental agility to talk, provide insights on a range of subjects, but I am going to take advantage of your security expertise here and
Sure.
just say, what do you make of the lack of more machinations around security in this summit? I too was anticipating more, and there was not a lot here, which may be good, may be bad. I'm still mulling it over myself. What is your take on the security bucket here coming out of the summit?
Yeah, I would say first that I don't think that's something that the U.S. president, President Trump, is focused on deeply, not at this point. Now, the staff, I'm certain, in the departments is well focused on this, and there's quite a bit of discussion going on that appears more in Korean press than it does in U.S. press on what it looks like to be flexible from basing in Korea, what the role of U.S. Forces Korea should be, how to achieve a higher degree of deterrence than we're currently achieving. John Hamre was outstanding in pointing out that we have actually failed in some key aspects of deterrence, particularly in the proliferation and development of nuclear weapons and weapon systems. However, there is clearly an ongoing deterrence structure that is successful. So how do you maintain that? I was very grateful that CSIS provided President Lee an opportunity at the Statesman Forum to lay out a lot more detail. And I think we have to take the White House meetings and the CSIS Forum as more of the totality of the picture that Lee Jae Myung wanted to paint in terms of how he views the alliance and its relationships abroad. And inside of that, we heard things like modernizing the South Korean military, having a more technical-based approach, advanced technology sharing with the United States, and trying to achieve a greater degree of advantage through conventional systems while also being committed to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And I think that was all good news. So these are all aspects of the security side. How to open a door with North Korea is going to be a big question. We'll see on that. North Korea will decide when the door is unlocked and opened. I've found them directly to be easy to work with when they want to be, and impossible to work with most of the other time because they choose not to be. So they'll determine when they want to open the door. I think Victor Cha wrote a book about the impossible state, and that's exactly who they are. But those would be my initial thoughts on security. I mean, there's a lot that's going to be discussed, and I think that it will be productive discussions that will happen over the ensuing months.
All right, outstanding. Thanks, General Brooks. All right, let me come. I'm going to come to Phil in 1 second, but Victor, I want to just one quick intervention from you, sort of a targeted question. Usually, you would see a lot more on the security issues in a joint communique or joint statement. There was none coming out of the summit, not inconsistent with other summit meetings that the president has had with other world leaders. But what are you hearing around the joint statement or lack thereof? Were there sticking points? Were there issues? Victor, over to you. The floor is yours. Then quick over to Phil.
Sure. So I think General Brooks is right. I mean, usually this first summit meeting provides an opportunity for some sort of vision statement, something that sort of sets the stage for the next, in President Lee's case, next 5 years, and President Trump the next 3 years, 3.5 years. That's normally what we'd see. We didn't see a joint communique. We didn't see a joint statement. We haven't even seen a joint press statement. We haven't seen a fact sheet, nothing like that. My understanding is that actually on the security issues, that there was that part of it was done, like that they were able to find the right language to use. I think if we go based on what President Lee said at CSIS on the question of China, for example, I think the language he used there, which by the way was mistranslated by the interpreter, but the language he used there would have been very good for the United States. He said that basically South Korea cannot help but focus in the direction of the United States, that the United States is the key partner. They have to deal with China issues because of the proximity of China, but on supply chains, on security, they're with the United States. That's effectively what he said. If there's something like that in the statement on security, on strategic flexibility, I think that would have been fine for the United States. So, Vince's point about modernization, these sorts of things, this is all good language. So I think that was all buttoned up. I think the difficulties really came on the trade and investment side, where they really tried to hammer out some of the details of what the terms of this $350 billion investment fund would be, when the 15% tariffs would kick in, because they haven't kicked in yet. They're still at 25. This is where I think they tried to get into the details and where they got stuck. And I think that's the reason we haven't seen a statement.
All right, outstanding. That's also the reason I went to you before going to Dr. Luck, to tee up Dr. Luck on the economic commercial trade bucket of issues. Dr. Luck, walk us through what you saw from your vantage point on this set of issues, which in a way have become the paramount set of issues, right? If you walk through joint statements in the past and how ambassadors gave speeches, you'd always lead with security. You'd come to kind of a little bit of politics and diplomacy, and then you'd get into kind of the trade stuff, right? And now you've got trade, I would argue, front and center, and at least co-equal, to use American parlance. What are you seeing from your vantage point on that bucket of issues, and any other as well? Because you're an honorary member of the Korea Chair as well here at CSIS. The floor is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I'm not sure what that says about my profession, that we're co-equal with security at this point. That's probably not a good thing. But no, I mean, absolutely. This is one of the huge issues in the summit. I think this was productive in the sense that, nothing got more complicated. But as Victor noted, there's still quite a bit that needs to be hashed out and figured out in terms of when these tariff rates are coming in, what is the form of these investment commitments. I mean, just, there's additional details around Korea Air making 103 purchases of Boeing plus some GE engines as well. These are all good things. I mean, many of these things probably were going to happen in some form or fashion anyways. And look, if we can use this as a way to smooth out other issues, that's great. The other thing I would note is that, I'm going to be misquoting him slightly, but the president said some version of, we kind of need each other in the Oval Office statement, which I think was like kind of a nice way to put it, which is like, that's mutually beneficial gains from trade, right? So the point of it, like, one of the things that's so frustrating to me is like, this is one of the most no-brainer economic relationships for finding really just excellent gains from trade, whether it's in shipbuilding or LNG and energy, or AI and semiconductors. There's just a million areas where there's just really low barriers to really excellent progress. So we can still do those things. Again, I don't think we're going to get to a place where there's a $350 billion investment fund that the U.S. somehow gets to have 90% of the profits from. That's probably not where we're going to end up. But again, I think we have laid out several areas where, again, I think both sides are understanding the huge economic benefits to continuing deeper collaboration. It's going to be, when the tariff rates come, making sure they hit all the things that both sides think they will. I'll sort of flag two things that I'm sort of concerned or thinking about going forward. The first is, I don't imagine that the U.S. administration is going to take just one bite at the apple. They've largely avoided or not made a lot of progress, both with the ROK and most of its partners, on other non-tariff barriers. So whether these be digital market regulation, which the ROK has bills that are largely modeled after the EMA, or other issues as well. So that's an area where I think we are going to continue to see this evolve and continue to see how this moves forward. The last thing I would say too is, look, all these investments are excellent, but many of these investments will in some sense exacerbate the original trigger to these concerns, which might be the trade deficit, right? If Korean companies invest in the United States, they will also probably import Korean-made intermediates to produce goods in the United States, which in itself can make the trade deficit worse. So that's much of a longer-term issue, but I just want to put that out there as a flag as well.
You're muted, Mark.
Sorry, I'm muted. I was slurping coffee, so I put myself on mute.
It looked like you were drinking Say's Gatorade there.
I had both. I have both. I have both. I have this. I'm ready to go here. So I was in the gym a little bit earlier, so I was pretending to sweat. When I was in the Navy, somebody accused me of just saying, all you do is throw water on yourself and walk around and make it look like you're working out. Anyway, so neither here nor there. But let me. I didn't mean, I wasn't planning on unpacking your second comment, Dr. Luck here, but let me take that for a second here in terms of the longer term, because there's an interesting, I would say, subplot here. One is, you've noticed from time to time rumblings about too much investment in the United States in and around Korean politics. Right? Why is all this money going to the U.S. not being invested here? Right? So there have been compensatory measures, I think, undertaken, like big semiconductor investment, all of that in the Republic of Korea. So that's one. The second point is, to your point, it's the trade deficit exacerbation. Is it part of the answer trying to figure out U.S. investment into the Republic of Korea? And I think the way the Trump guys see it is open markets, which I think is not unfair, but also I think there's also a piece of the regulatory regime in Korea that will attract more PE, more VC, more straight up capital investment that will unlock some of these industries and arbitrages that will help put Koreans to work as well. So just comments on that piece as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on both of those. The first is, I mean, obviously the U.S. administration is going to tout the investments into the United States, but we actually have a pretty robust, two-way FDI relationship at this point with the ROK. And you can see why there might be, it become politically unpopular. It's always unpopular to talk about sending money somewhere else. But so I think, to your second point, yes, regulatory reforms. I mean, reforms in the ROK can be very helpful there. Also, not modeling certain legislation that comes out of the EU that has more of a precautionary principle that, again, it's generally speaking something that, irritates U.S. policymakers. It also, generally speaking, does tend to have a bit of a anti-competitive force to it. So I think there are ways which, here we can make policy changes, or we can sort of pursue together policy changes that will be both reducing sort of bilateral irritants and, deepen that relationship through that two-way FDI. The last thing I would say too there, though, is also, this inflow of investment into the United States is good, but it's also the thing that has propped up the U.S. dollar for so long, right? And that has exacerbated that trade deficit. So, it is an issue too, where, yes, of course we need to stimulate investment, but that does have a mechanical connection to this other issue around the trade deficit.
All right, outstanding. I think just to leave here underscoring that there's not just negotiations on kind of funds and things like that and tariff rate, but there's also some real guts, for lack of a better term, that if we get to that, that's also productive down the road as well. So lots of issues to kind of chew on going forward. All right, outstanding. Victor, over to you. This is the part of the show where usually I ask a question, you refuse to comment, and you answer your own question. So let's bake that in. But what the question that I would like you to answer at some point is, I want to shift to General Brooks's comments about North Korea, a little bit about China as well that you mentioned earlier, and then the Japan piece, which you teed up in your explainer intervention early on. Victor, the floor is yours.
Okay, I will answer those, Mark, but can I just say something on the economics and trade part of this, which is, I think it is really it's the big non-story of the summit, in the sense that I think it all did go really well. I mean, even despite the fact that there was that social media post that President Trump put out about raiding churches that got a lot of people really concerned that this was going to be a disaster. It all went quite well. But I think the real non-story of the summit is the inability for them to get agreement on nailing down some of the specifics with regard to the investment fund, profit sharing, these sorts of things. And I think frankly, I think even though it was a good summit, coming out of the summit, there's a lot of pressure now on the South Korean government, because initially, I think the Trump administration used the summit as tried to get leverage to try to get the things they wanted, in terms of the investment fund, profit sharing, ag, those sorts of things. The summit came and passed. South Korean companies have pretty much done all they could do, right? There was the big announcement by Korean Air, right? 103 Boeing airplanes. Hyundai Motors made an announcement of an additional investment in addition to their 21 billion. So they've done all they can. And now the pressure is really on the South Korean government to reach an agreement with the Trump administration. But I don't think it's going to happen until after the Japan deal, right? Phil, they're negotiating the Japan terms of the Japan investment deal. And then maybe at that point, the Koreans will know where they want to go on this. So that's a first point. Second, on Japan, again, I think it was a very good and calculated move by Lee to make the trip to Japan first. I thought it was a very smart thing to do. There would be no way the Trump administration would have a problem with that. And it sort of set the tone of where he wants to go in terms of foreign policy. So I think that was great. I think people were on pins and needles when during the Oval briefing, President Trump raised comfort women. And he talked about the late Prime Minister Abe as being a good friend of Korea's. I think that put people on pins and needles a little bit. But to me, the big story of the Oval Office briefing was how President Lee led Trump into a conversation about North Korea by pressing two buttons. One of them was talking about how Trump is a peace builder, and we know that he really does see himself that way. And then the second is to talk about real estate, the idea of building a Trump Tower in Pyongyang, of golf course, and to say, quote, Kim Jong-un is waiting for you. This just then pulled Trump into a conversation about North Korea that took up the majority of the hour. I think most likely a conversation that under normal circumstances would happen behind closed doors. But maybe both leaders wanted to be public because they wanted to signal to Kim Jong-un a willingness to talk, a willingness to open the door and talk. As General Brooks said, we can signal all we want, but the North Koreans will decide when they want to open that door. The initial response doesn't seem to be positive in terms of opening that door, but that was clearly the message that they were trying to send with that. And then on China, I think probably to me the biggest story out of the speech at CSIS was the question that Dr. Henry asked him about China and his response, which I think was a very clear statement about where President Lee sees the South Korea aligning. This wasn't a question of economics with China, security and politics with the United States. He clearly eschewed that as being the model. He said, on all the important issues, we're with the United States, and we have issues we have to deal with with China because they're our neighbor, but we're basically in the U.S. camp. And I thought that was like the big story coming out of his speech at CSIS.
No, outstanding. All right, Victor, and maybe I'll just put a bow on this round and then go to General Brooks for his comments on China, Japan as well, North Korea added in there. But just to summarize on the summit, I from all of our experts, was pretty interesting is first, there was no blow up, right, that everybody wanted to avoid. Second, the framework, either stuck or is emerging. There's some sort of framework potentially there that both sides can work through. Lots of work to be done below that. Third point is there's some common ground, right, as you laid out, Victor, that they found in the Oval Office. And I think the one thing we haven't talked about is the personal relationship seemed to work, right? I think Lee was quite engaging. He seemed both confident but not combative, right? In terms of there was a nice back and forth in the Oval Office. But Victor, any comments, quick comments on that, and then to General Brooks?
Yeah, I think, Mark, we talked about it during the evening at CSIS that I think we both felt like he was, at least to me, unusually and surprisingly comfortable and confident, not arrogant, but comfortable and confident, very quick, right, to respond. Doing this all, in a foreign language, first time in the Oval Office. Other leaders clearly visibly nervous when they're sitting in the Oval Office. I mean, he admitted in his CSIS speech that they were worried about a Zelensky moment. I think it was the way he put it, but he was very comfortable and really kind of had command. I thought he had command of the conversation and moved it in the direction that he wanted to go. So yeah, and the body language was again, he was sitting up on the very edge of his seat, leaning in the direction of President Trump, speaking directly to Trump rather than to the cameras. I think flattering the president, obviously, that's what everybody does. And, Trump was kind of like sitting there and soaking it all in. He was very, in a sense, not combative at all, quite reserved and kind of enjoying all the flattery. So
yeah, and they leaned in. The body language looked good. They were leaning in, I thought as well, not to overinterpret it. And I would also say that the other thing about President Lee that I thought was great, dealing with a very unscripted president, he himself was unscripted, right? So there was a genuine back and forth instead of reading note cards or being overly scripted or all of that. So okay, General Brooks, over to you on regional foreign policy issues. You opened the door on North Korea. I'd love to get your thoughts about where we're headed. You shamelessly plugged Victor's book, which flattered him, This show is about flattery as well. But your thoughts on the North Korea piece, the China piece in particular, as well as the Japan piece. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, the regional relationships will determine the trajectory of all of this. This is where it's going to go. It won't be any single country's interest that will be fulfilled. It will have to be a collective approach, and very much like walking on a seesaw that has multiple points on it. You got to be careful about how you put pressure in any one direction, because it has an effect on all the others. I used to use the metaphor of the five fingers around North Korea, of U.S., Japan, South Korea, China, and Russia. Those all have influence, but they also have relationships. So the approach to relationships, I think, is going to be very important. President Lee Jae Myung made it very clear that he will be pragmatic about relationships, and that you have to do what you have to do to make progress. And President Trump was pragmatic in this particular meeting about relationships, as the two of them talked about approaching China with a positive outlook. And so I hope that China will take from this that it was not a threatening meeting, as they might have anticipated it could have been if they were the subject of all negative comments. That was not the case here. So the door is open for constructive dialogue with China, and a new set of relationships is likely to emerge for South Korea and China, U.S. and South Korea, U.S. and China, that combination. Now, having said that, that's one board on the seesaw. Another one is the trilateral relationship between the United States, Japan, and South Korea. And President Jae Myung's maneuver to stop in Japan first and to have a high-level meeting with the Prime Minister and then proceed to the United States was not only a change to the pattern, but also a very important signal that I think also diffused potential pressure that he might have gotten from within the Oval Office on why can't you do more with Japan? So this is now well established. That's another board in the seesaw. How do those two combinations of three then end up working toward North Korea? President Trump mentioned that he wanted China to sort it out and fix it in his first administration. And I do recall that being part of the approach. China's response was, hey, we don't have any more control over them than you do. And you may recall that kind of conversation. So what will be expected of China with regard to North Korea? What does North Korea want with regard to China? And this is one I think we shouldn't assume that North Korea is an eternal ally or even a subject of the tributary state of the People's Republic of China. That I don't think that's what it is at all. North Korea would probably like to be in a much more independent posture for all five fingers surrounding it. And I suspect their belief is the only way to get to that is through the right kind of relationship with the United States. Now, how do you get to that? I mean, this is the part that has evaded administration after administration and will likely be difficult to pursue in this case also because of the balancing that's required. What will be the relationship between North Korea and Russia? There's certainly cooperation going on. It appears to be transactional, not deeply emotional or ideological in any way. But what is it that Russia really wants? In addition to artillery shells, there's probably something more that Russia is looking for. And what will that be? Is that going to be a rail line that runs from the eastern provinces of Russia down through the eastern edge of North Korea to the tourist site in Wonsan and potentially proceeding all the way down through South Korea? And Russia has expressed a desire for that before economically. What will it look like? What will the cooperation between Russia and China look like? And we see them conducting exercises to create demonstrations around the region, military exercises working together, efforts to challenge the sovereignty of several nations, including the United States, as we've seen with Russian bombers here recently. So it will remain tense in the security space, but ideally, that creates room for diplomacy to occur, even when there's tension. That tension is helpful. It's almost like pulling a cord taut and then striking it. You want to get a sound out of it. You want to get resonation out of it. But you must have tension in order for that to occur. And that tension comes in many cases from the military relationship. So how do you do that without falling into war, without missing opportunities? And that will yet to be seen. My last point on this would be that I do believe that there will be some door opening by North Korea. It probably won't be any earlier than October or November, if then, after the UN General Assembly, after a few more pieces fall in the international relationships. And then North Korea will take stock of what the environment looks like around them and will choose to move at that point in time. So I think that's what we ought to look for at the end of the year.
All right, outstanding, General Brooks. One quick follow-up. Why do you feel that the North Koreans will make some sort of approach and or opening at that time?
Yeah, I still think that North Korea is not in the position it wants to be in. So the adversarial relationship that they feel, and certainly they felt under the previous South Korean administration, which was very much about a strength through power and no way to maneuver forward. You have to pressure someone into the outcomes that you seek, and that was their choice. And there's certainly a large school of thought that agrees with that. But that was an endless cycle that would never have moved toward dialogue or progress. The only way to do that is to take a degree of risk, and I think North Korea realizes that they may have a chance now to see South Korea and the U.S. and Japan all take a degree of risk, at which time North Korea will take risk with regard to Russia and China. And so that's what I think it's going to be. It'll be bilateral, to be sure. North Korea's prime focus is going to be on the United States, and probably they will insult and isolate South Korea at the outset, which is part of the practice. But that's the intention of getting into bilateral discussions in a priority sequence, and North Korea will signal that here in the next few months.
All right, outstanding. Thanks, General Brooks. Let me come to Dr. Luck. Dr. Luck, I want to rewind the tape a little bit in General Brooks's intervention and pull out the China piece and bring it into the economic realm. The Korean-China relationship in terms of the economic piece is evolving and has evolved, right, dramatically, right? And let me see if you agree with this proposition, right? Korean companies are, and they're not mutually exclusive, have exited China in terms of supply chain work. They're not totality, but there's been a general move out, right? Look at Vietnam being a recipient, other parts of Southeast Asia. Markets for some major segments of Korean goods is drying up, and the Chinese are competing strongly with Korean companies and moving up that value chain into the highest technology areas in which Korean companies often occupy the commanding heights. So that relationship is changing as well. If you agree, interested if you agree, and B, your thoughts on how that might bleed into the broader geoeconomic, geopolitical game here that General Brooks has outlined.
Yeah, well, the first thing I'll say, I definitely agree that that's the case with around sentiment, right? So in terms of, I think we're in some ways, and I don't want to draw the analogy too closely, but it's similar to what you have in Europe, where there's a realization that putting all your chips or even any substantial number of your chips in the PRC market, either as a market where you want to do business or as a reliable supplier, is not a very good idea, right? And I think that that's strictly the case. There's that realization, and then there's doing something about it. And there's a pretty big space between those, right? And I totally agree with you that companies are looking at their supply chains more, with a closer eye, and many are sort of shifting supply chains. But I think, the ROK, it is probably one of the most, if not the most, exposed to the PRC economically than any other country in the world, right? In that sense, they're the quintessential rock and a hard place if you're going to have both the PRC and the U.S. being somewhat coercive. So, I think, and this is where I was going to bring this up, so I appreciate you flagging this. The sentiment of, we're in the U.S. camp, 100%, we want to be with you guys. I think that's entirely, I don't doubt that for a second. But then there's actualizing that, right? Basically, their proximity to the PRC doesn't just mean they have sort of security concerns. It also just means that, the same way Canada will never be rid of us in a true sense, the ROK is where they are, and their economy. So the ROK's exports has more embedded content from the PRC than it does from the United States, right? So even from actualizing their own exports to the rest of the world, they're incredibly dependent on the PRC. So, I think we will all sort of do some de-risking. I just would hesitate to say that this is something that can be done, in anything short of, honestly, a decade, absent something really quite dramatic.
No, interesting. I mean, I guess I would say if you look at snapshots, you go back a decade, and it's the Koreans doing a ton of business in China with huge supply chain dependence, or I guess utilization, and then it's moved to an interesting place now, and then it'll be interesting to see where we go in terms of sentiment moving forward. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So I think that's exactly what I think about, which is like basically, I guess the point I would say is to exactly your point. A decade ago, we were in a very different place, and the investments that were being made then now make the supply chains of today, right? And then to move the supply chains of today, we need consistent de-risking over the next decade or so. I would just say that again, basically what I'm saying is none of this stuff changes overnight, the same way that none of these supply chains do. So it's just going to take some time. And from a U.S. perspective, I think it would be good for policy to not provide incentives to not de-risk, right? Or sometimes to de-risk from the PRC requires going more in the U.S. camp. That needs to be thought of as a safe bet as well.
Right, or to Southeast Asia and have Southeast Asia be hammered with tariffs and so interesting stuff. Okay, great. We're out of time. I'm going to give everybody 30 seconds to make just a final thoughts. Victor, final thoughts to you.
So I think it's going to be a busy fall. President Trump said he wants to meet Kim Jong-un before the end of the year. He was prompted and he said yes before the end of the year. He's getting ready for a meeting with Xi Jinping, almost certainly. He kept talking about that as well. Plus, we have ASEAN, APEC, and Quad leaders all in the fall. So I think it's going to be a busy fall.
Darn it, I was hoping to take the fall off. Anyway, all right, outstanding. Dr. Luck.
Busy fall indeed. That's exciting. I would say, on the economic front, there's sort of there's ironing out the details that we don't have right now. And then there's, to me, it's going to be once USTR sort of regroups after this flurry, like what's the next bite of the apple look like? So what are the details for now? And, when it comes to non-tariff barriers or ag or other issues, like what are the next set of asks?
All right, outstanding. And General Brooks.
Yeah, I certainly agree. It's going to be a busy fall, and this is going to be a busy region, and it's tied to so many key interests, key national interests that in the area, including the United States. So keep your eyes on the Indo-Pacific, and particularly in that part of Northeast Asia and what's happening there. All the best to you, Mark, Robin. Please give her our regards, and to Sejun and Sehi, now that they're getting pretty big. So, and Victor and Phil, thanks so much for being on.
All right, outstanding. Thanks. Gavel down on episode 119. General Brooks, thank you. I will carry those messages back to my much more famous, more intelligent, better looking, more successful wife and children than myself, and really appreciate the sentiment. Dr. Luck, as always, thanks for the fantastic insights. Really appreciate you getting here. I know you've been a little under the weather, so appreciate you battling through. And of course, Victor, thanks for giving us a lot of homework for the fall. I was looking forward to a long vacation, but now I actually have to work. So really appreciate it, and we'll see everybody here in a few weeks. And thanks again. Great summit. We're off and running on the next installment of the ROC-US relationship going forward. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks a lot.